Okay, so today's topic is Oregon trade tokens. Here you'll see one of my tokens from Grants Pass, Miners Exchange, which was a saloon. So what are trade tokens? Trade tokens, also known as good for tokens, they're privately issued to advertise a business, and the token would usually have the proprietor's name, the city and state, and maybe an address. They were used mainly as a form of credit or discount, and sometimes in the place of money. But usually they were used as a discount, kind of like a coupon. You would buy, a dollar's worth of goods. Maybe they give you an extra 5-cent token for the next time you return. They were usually good for an amount of money or merchandise in trade at the store that they were issued from. So let's talk about some common denominations. So we usually see 2.5, 5, 6.25, 10, 12.5, 25, 50 cent, and a dollar. So sometimes there were some other denominations in there. They could also be good for merchandise, such as good for a drink, good for a cigar, or good for a pint of milk.
Hey, Jason, I'm curious. So when you see the half cents, or why am I seeing 2.5 cents or 12.5 cents? That just seems kind of strange to me.
Well, the half cents were usually to break a quarter. So a quarter was commonly called 2 bits. A bit would be 12.5 cents. Okay. So the 12.5 cent, like I said, would be half a quarter. 6.25 cent would be, half a bit. And then the 2.5 cents could just make it to where they could give you change for just that portion, and then give you a dime or two nickels. All right, so here are a few of the denominations that you'll find. You'll see good for 1 loaf of bread. There's a 2.5 cent, good for 12.5 cents. And this one down here in the corner is good for a quart of milk.
And I'm curious, Jason, Jerry, what time frame were these tokens typically produced?
Most of these tokens come from the time frame of about 1880 into the 1930s and 40s. You'll usually see after 1940s, you'll see wooden nickels instead of metal tokens. And previous to the 1880s, most tokens like Civil War tokens or hard times tokens, those weren't really meant to be denominations. They were passed as pennies. So yeah, from 1880s up until the 40s. But I think that most of these in Oregon you're going to see are right around like turn of the century and into the 20s. So what are tokens made of? So commonly brass, copper, white metal, aluminum. You'll see some bimetal, fiber, plastic, wood, and sometimes cardboard.
Aluminum, huh? So that's kind of interesting. I think aluminum, aluminum cans, things along those lines, is kind of a more modern type metal. When did they start doing aluminum?
So aluminum started to be mass produced in 1890. So you will see a lot of those older tokens in aluminum. Part of that is because previous to 1890, aluminum was an expensive metal. The cap of the Washington Monument is actually made of aluminum, and that's because it was really valuable in those days. And then, in the 1890s, aluminum was kind of considered the metal of the future. So you'll see a lot of tokens made out of aluminum just because it was so popular. Trade tokens come in all sorts of shapes, obviously round. But you'll also see scalloped, like these two at the top here, oval, octagon, and square. So let's just go over a little bit of terminology. So if you hear someone call a token a maverick, that's because the token doesn't have the town and state listed on it. And when they talk about attributions, this is, and I put it, the attempt to match a maverick token with a particular town or state. So I've got a couple examples below. So the first one is good for 1 drink, Lou. So this is an old attribution. This token comes from Grants Pass, Oregon. These tokens are actually mentioned in a history book, and the attribution is pretty old. And this other one, H.P. Walters on the square, this is also attributed to Grants Pass, but I don't have a lot of knowledge about this one. It's not an old attribution. I've never found anything about H.P. Walters, at least that had any sort of business, or the on the square motto. Here are some popular ways to collect. Some people collect all from a town or a county or even a state. A lot of people just collect one per town. How I usually collect Oregon tokens, I just like one per location. Some people collect by denominations. They like the odd denominations, or they really like the 12.5 cents, or good for a cigar or good for a drink. And then the last is by business type. So a lot of people collect saloons or cigar stores or pool halls.
Now, with that said, is there any that are more, I guess, less common or more rare than others? Cigar stores or saloons? Is there any difference between those?
Cigar stores are really common. Saloons are a little less common, and I think that's mainly because saloons date, previous to Prohibition. There were a lot more cigar stores that were around in the 20s, 30s. So they had a little more chance to make tokens for those. Who made tokens? So when you're talking Oregon trade tokens, we're really talking about a few places like L.H. Moyse and Company, Clinker and Company. Those two actually merged in 1896. Worth and Jenkins, who are still around in San Francisco. They make police badges and things today. Pacific Coast Stamp Works made a lot of the Northwest trade tokens, and they were out of Seattle. His next two were back east, Bernard and Hanson, and they made a lot of tokens for everywhere. And then there was probably at least one Portland manufacturer, and this is based on some die studies that have been done by collectors, but we just haven't found any evidence for that manufacturer yet. One day we'll find that token catalog where you could order them, or a receipt or something to show that. The next item is mintage. For trade tokens, you usually saw mintages of 100 to 1,000. 1,000 being a fairly large order, especially before the 20s. After that, you would see orders of a few more, or you might see someone order 1,000 and then order another 1,000. If they were good for 5 cents, as the value of a nickel kind of decreased, they would they would order more, or as more of them got distributed but didn't come back.
Wow, so that's a really small number to think about. So, it looks like you're going to talk about here or on the next slide. I assume there's going to be some rarity associated with that, just because of such small many numbers.
Oh yeah, no, even the most common trade token from Oregon, if it were a U.S. coin made by the mint, it would be very valuable because the numbers are so much smaller. Let's talk about the reference materials. For Oregon trade tokens, we're really talking about tokencatalog.com. Now, tokencatalog.com lists tokens from all over the world, mainly the United States, a lot of Oregon, a lot of Washington and California especially. The main book on the subject is Oregon Trade Tokens by James Hemphill, and then there was a supplement to that, Oregon Trade Token Supplement by Mike Rose. Let's go over the rarity. So in Hemphill's book, he came up with the scale, and he came up with this by counting the number of tokens that he found in people's collections that they kind of reported to him. So if he found more than 50, he listed that as R1 or abundant. 36 to 50, common. 21 to 35, scarce. 11 to 22, very scarce. 6 to 10, rare. And 2 to 5, very rare. And R7 being unique. One example. So you can see by this, by just these numbers, when he's polling all the collectors that he kind of knew, and a common token would be, if he saw 36 of them.
Wow.
So, whereas, say, a pretty rare U.S. coin that has value, like a 1909 SVDB penny, there are still 500,000 of those out there. or better.
Yeah.
Condition. So the condition really doesn't matter for trade tokens as long as they're readable. Whereas for, a U.S. coin collector, rim dings and scratches and, nicks in the field would affect the value. Those really don't matter in token collecting. While you want to have the nicest looking ones, it doesn't necessarily mean much.
Yeah. So I guess that's another question. What's the price range for some of these? Someone's interested in getting involved in tokens. Is this a expensive hobby to start, or what type of price points are we looking at?
Oh yeah, no, this is a really cheap hobby to get into. Your starting point for tokens is going to be, they can be as low as $1, but I'd say 2 to 3 is probably your good starter token. The ones that are listed here, R1, R2, abundant and common, you'll get for $2 or $3, and you'll be able to collect. If you were just doing towns in Oregon, you can easily get 50, 60 towns in that price range like that. And then they kind of go up from there. You'll see tokens that are, about $5, $10, 20, 40, maybe 60, 80. And then it gets, when you get to those R5s and R6s, they might get, $75, $100. And then your more rare or unique ones, they'll go, for over that. About the top price for Oregon trade tokens around $650 or so. And of course, it also depends on how many collectors want that. Really rare towns where there are a lot of people going after, that one rare token from a town. If that token happens to be a saloon where there are even more people that want the saloon tokens, that could raise the price. So there are a lot of things that affect the price, and for certainly less than $1,000, you'll get every trade token that you ever really wanted.
And I'm sure you've probably been asked this question. What has been the most expensive trade token that you're aware of?
So the most expensive trade token that I'm aware of isn't an Oregon token. It actually came from the Arizona territory, and I just happen to have a slide of it. So this came from Campbell and Hatch. Hatch was a good friend of Wyatt Earp, and this happened to be from the saloon that Wyatt Earp's brother, Morgan, was shot and killed. So, and this trade token, I think it sold for about $8,500.
I'm doing a search here on that. I see here it kind of has an interesting comment about this particular token. It says, one Arizona token expert once said, if you put this token to your ear, you can hear the sounds of 1880s Tombstone, which I think is pretty funny, pretty interesting.
It's a really nice little piece of history, as are a lot of these other tokens. There's a lot to be learned from them. If you study the proprietors, the towns who made them, there's a lot of interesting stories to be found.